Introduction to the protagonist. A cold gust of wind swept through the narrow alleyways as Aisha pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale golden glow over the small town where she lived. It was another day in the house she could never truly call home. Aisha had been only 14 when her father passed away, leaving her in the care of her stepmother, Razia Begum. Before his death, her father had been a respected merchant, known for his generosity and wisdom. But fate had been cruel, snatching him away in an unexpected accident, and with him all the warmth and security Aisha had ever known. Razia was a woman of sharp words and even sharper intentions. From the moment she had married Aisha's father, she had resented his daughter. At first, she hid it behind forced smiles and empty gestures, but once he was gone, her mask slipped completely. Overnight, Aisha's world transformed. She was no longer the cherished daughter of a kind father, but an unwanted burden in her own home. The grand house, which once echoed with laughter and stories, now felt like a cage. Razia took control of everything, her father's wealth, his business, and even Aisha's freedom. The young girl was reduced to a mere servant, tending to the house, cooking meals, and obeying the endless demands of her stepmother. The once silky dresses her father had gifted her were now worn and faded. The books he had bought for her education were locked away, replaced by endless chores. Despite the harsh treatment, Aisha refused to let despair consume her. She found solace in the small, hidden moments of joy, watching the sunrise from the rooftop, sneaking a few pages of her father's old books when Razia wasn't looking, and whispering her dreams to the stars at night. She held on to the lessons her father had taught her. No matter how dark the night, the dawn will always come. But the dawn seemed far away. Recently, Razia had been acting strangely. Her sharp eyes gleamed with something more than just cruelty, something calculating. Aisha often caught her in hushed conversations with unfamiliar men. Coins exchanged hands, papers were signed, and Razia's greedy smile grew wider. Aisha sensed that something was coming, something that would change her life forever. Then, one evening, Razia made an announcement that sent chills down Aisha's spine. "You are to be married," she declared, her tone leaving no room for protest. Aisha's heart pounded. Married? To whom? Why so suddenly? She searched Razia's face for answers, but all she saw was triumph. The room spun around her as realization hit. Her stepmother had not just stolen her home and freedom. She was about to steal her entire future. And the worst part? Aisha had no idea what lay ahead. Stepmother's greed. Aisha sat frozen, her stepmother's words echoing in her mind. Married? To whom? The thought made her stomach churn. She had never been given a choice in anything since her father's passing, but this was different. This wasn't just another chore or punishment. This was her life. Razia Begum, however, looked pleased with herself. She sipped her tea leisurely, watching Aisha's reaction with a smirk. "You should be grateful," she said, tapping her fingers against the rim of her cup. "A girl like you, with no dowry, no status, who else would take you?" Aisha clenched her fists beneath the table. She knew better than to argue, but she couldn't hold back. "Who is he?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Razia's smile widened. "A wealthy man," she said simply. "That is all you need to know." Aisha's heart pounded. A wealthy man? That meant her stepmother was selling her off, trading her like a piece of property. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was he old? Cruel? Was there something wrong with him? Why would a rich man agree to marry a girl like her, someone without wealth or a powerful family name? She looked at Razia, searching for answers in her cold, calculating eyes. And then it clicked. This wasn't about Aisha's future. It was about money. Her stepmother had always been obsessed with wealth, constantly scheming to get more. After Aisha's father died, she had taken control of everything: his shop, his home, even the smallest pieces of jewelry Aisha's mother had left behind. But somehow, it had never been enough. The business had failed under her careless management, debts had piled up, and now she had found the perfect solution: Aisha, She was nothing more than a bargaining chip in Razia's eyes, a quick way to secure more wealth, no matter the cost. Tears burned at the corners of Aisha's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I won't do it," she said firmly. The air in the room grew tense. Razia's smirk faded, replaced by something colder. "You think you have a choice?" she asked, setting down her tea with a sharp clink. "You will do as I say. The papers are already signed. You belong to him now." Aisha's breath caught in her throat. Already signed? Panic swelled in her chest. It was too late. The deal had been made, and she was nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't understand. But one thing was certain. Whoever this man was, he had agreed to marry her without even meeting her. And that meant he had secrets of his own. The forced marriage. Aisha's world felt like it was closing in around her. The wedding preparations had begun without her consent, and no one seemed to care. The house was suddenly filled with activity. Maids rushing in and out, jewelers arriving with glittering sets of gold, and a tailor taking her measurements while she stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Her protests had fallen on deaf ears. She had begged, pleaded, even tried to run away, but Razia had anticipated it all. The doors were locked, the windows secured, and 2 of Razia's most loyal servants were ordered to keep a watchful eye on her at all times. "You should be thankful," Razia sneered, folding her arms as she observed Aisha's misery. "Many girls dream of marrying into wealth, and here you are, crying like a fool." Aisha's heart pounded. "I don't want to marry a stranger," she said through clenched teeth. "Why are you doing this to me?" Razia's expression darkened. "Because you are nothing without me. You have no father, no dowry, no future. This marriage is a blessing, and you will obey me." The night before the wedding, Aisha sat by the small window in her room, staring at the moon with tears in her eyes. She thought of her father. If he were alive, he would have never let this happen. He had always promised to find a match who would love and respect her. But now, she was being sold like property to a man she had never even seen. The day of the wedding arrived, and Aisha's body felt numb as she was dressed in an elaborate bridal outfit. Gold bangles clinked on her wrists, heavy earrings weighed down her ears, and her face was adorned with makeup to hide the traces of her tears. She felt like a beautifully decorated prisoner walking toward her own doom. The ceremony was a blur. She could barely hear the priest's words over the pounding of her heart. The moment she feared the most arrived, the question that would seal her fate. "Kabul Hai? Do you accept?" Aisha hesitated. Every fiber of her being wanted to scream no. But then, she saw Razia's piercing gaze, filled with silent threats. The memory of her failed escape attempts, the locked doors, and the guards stationed outside flashed in her mind. She knew what would happen if she refused. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Kabul Hai." The words felt like chains wrapping around her soul. The guests cheered, the priest continued the rituals, and her stepmother smiled in triumph. But deep inside, Aisha knew this was not the end. This was just the beginning of something far more terrifying. The unknown secret. The wedding was over, but Aisha felt no joy. The rituals, the guests, and even the lavish decorations had faded into a blur. Now she sat inside her new home, a grand but eerily silent mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. Her husband, Zayan, had barely spoken to her. He had been polite during the ceremony, but distant. Even now he remained quiet, sitting across from her in the dimly lit room. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. "You must be tired," he finally said, his voice calm yet unreadable. "Rest for now." Aisha nodded, unsure of what to say. Her mind swirled with questions. Who really was this man? Why had he agreed to marry a girl he had never met? Something about him felt off. As the days passed, she began noticing strange things about her new husband. He would leave the house at odd hours, disappearing into the night without an explanation. His study remained locked at all times, and the few servants in the mansion avoided eye contact whenever she asked about him. One evening, while wandering through the halls, she overheard a hushed conversation between 2 servants. She shouldn't have been brought here, one whispered. It's not our place to question him, the other replied. But if she finds out the truth... The truth? Aisha's blood ran cold. What were they talking about? What was Zion hiding? Determined to uncover the mystery, she waited until everyone was asleep and tiptoed toward his study. With a racing heart, she tried the door. Locked. But then, as if fate were on her side, she noticed a small key left on the nearby table. Her hands trembled as she slid it into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with old books, scattered papers, and something that made her breath hitch. On the desk lay a stack of documents, each one holding the same name, Zion Ahmed Khan, but the details were different. Different birth dates, different addresses, different identities. Her husband was not who he claimed to be. Aisha's heart pounded. Who had she married? A fugitive? A man living a double life? A dangerous criminal? Before she could react, she felt a presence behind her. I see you've been busy. Zion's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with intensity. Aisha turned slowly, fear gripping her. The man she had married was a stranger, and now she was trapped in his world. A mysterious mansion. The carriage came to a slow halt in front of a towering mansion, its dark silhouette standing against the night sky. Aisha clutched the edge of her shawl, her heartbeat unsteady. This was her new home, a place that felt more like a prison than a beginning. The grand wooden doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with antique furniture and portraits that seemed to watch her every move. The air smelled of old wood and something faintly metallic, something unsettling. A man, tall and stern, stepped forward. Welcome, madam, he said, bowing slightly. I am Sikandar, the head servant. Please, follow me. Aisha glanced at her husband Zayan, but he barely acknowledged her. Instead, he strode inside without a word, his figure disappearing into the shadows. As she followed Sikandar down the long corridor, she couldn't ignore the eerie silence that filled the house. The few servants she passed avoided eye contact, their gazes darting away the moment she looked at them. Some whispered among themselves, their hushed tones laced with urgency. The mansion felt alive, not in a welcoming way, but in a way that sent a chill down her spine. At dinner, she noticed more oddities. The dining hall was large, yet only a handful of candles were lit, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The food was served in complete silence, the servants moving with unnatural precision, their faces blank. Then there were the strange noises, soft whispers that had no source, doors creaking open on their own, and the unmistakable sensation of being watched. That night, as Aisha lay in bed, sleep refused to come. A cold breeze swept through the room, even though the windows were shut. The flickering candle by her bedside dimmed suddenly, and for a split second, she thought she saw a shadow move across the far wall. She sat up, her breath caught in her throat. Was it just her imagination, or was there something else lurking in this house? Whatever secrets this mansion held, Aisha knew one thing for certain. She was not alone. A mysterious mansion. When Emily stepped out of the carriage, the imposing mansion loomed before her, casting a long shadow over the garden as the sun dipped below the horizon. She had recently inherited the estate from a distant relative she barely knew. The letters had promised a life of comfort, but the eerie silence that greeted her made her question her decision. The mansion was grand, with towering columns and ivy creeping up its stone walls. Its windows, dark and foreboding, seemed to watch her every move. Emily shivered despite the warm air. She had heard stories about the mansion, of course, whispers of strange happenings, but she had dismissed them as nothing more than old village legends. Now, standing at its entrance, she began to wonder if there was more truth to them than she had realized. As she stepped inside, the smell of dust and ancient wood filled her nostrils. The foyer was vast, with a sweeping staircase and portraits of grim-faced ancestors lining the walls. A soft footstep echoed in the hallway behind her. She turned to find a tall woman standing in the doorway, a servant by the looks of her. "Welcome, Miss Emily," the woman said, her voice low and curt. "I am Mrs. Blackwell. We've been expecting you." Emily nodded and offered a smile, but Mrs. Blackwell didn't return it. She merely turned and began walking down the hall without waiting for Emily to follow. Reluctantly, Emily trailed behind her, her curiosity growing with each step. The mansion seemed deserted, save for the servants, yet Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In the kitchen, the cook, an older man with a hunched back, did not meet her eyes. His hands trembled as he prepared a simple meal, though the rest of him was eerily still. The moment their eyes met, he quickly looked away, mumbling something about dinner being served soon. Later that night, Emily retired to her chambers, her unease growing by the minute. The room was lavish, with heavy curtains drawn over the windows. She had just begun to unpack when a soft knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Mrs. Blackwell standing there once more, her face expressionless. "Would you like a bath, Miss Emily?" she asked. Emily hesitated but nodded, though she was surprised by the offer. A strange compulsion to comply gripped her, and she followed Mrs. Blackwell down the long, dimly lit hallway. The bathroom was cold, and as Emily stepped into the tub, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She could have sworn she heard soft whispers coming from the walls. Her heart raced as the shadows around her seemed to grow darker. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard it again, the whispering. But this time, it was clearer. Someone was calling her name. She shot up, her breath shallow, and glanced around the room. There was no one. But the air felt thicker now, oppressive, as though the very walls were alive, watching her. Determined to get answers, Emily made her way to the library the following morning. The shelves were lined with dusty books, most of them forgotten relics of a past long buried. As she pulled a volume off the shelf, something caught her eye, an old journal hidden behind the books. She opened it, reading the entries of the mansion's previous inhabitants. They spoke of a curse, of restless spirits trapped within the walls, of secrets that no one dared to speak aloud. A sudden chill ran through her as she realized the truth. The mansion was not just haunted by the past, it was alive with its own dark history, and the servants were not what they seemed. Something sinister was waiting for her to discover it. The question was, would she survive long enough to uncover the mansion's deadly secret? A hidden ally. Emily sat alone in the dark library, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages of the old journal. The weight of the mansion's eerie silence pressed on her, and the cryptic words seemed to swim before her eyes. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but she didn't know what. The whispers, the strange behavior of the servants, and the oppressive atmosphere all pointed to one thing. She was trapped in a web of secrets. Just as her eyes began to blur with exhaustion, a soft knock on the door startled her. She quickly slammed the journal shut and stood up, expecting Mrs. Blackwell, the ever-watchful housekeeper. But when she opened the door, it was not Mrs. Blackwell. Instead, it was Eliza, the maid who had only been working at the mansion for a short time. "Miss Emily, I need to speak with you," Eliza whispered, her wide eyes scanning the hallway nervously. Emily's heart raced. "What's wrong, Eliza?" The maid hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before stepping inside and closing the door softly behind her. "I didn't want to frighten you, but I can see you've already figured out something's not right. The mansion, it's not just haunted by the past. The family who owned it before you, they were involved in dark practices, and so were the people who worked here." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "What dark practices?" Eliza took a deep breath, lowering her voice. "It's an old curse, Miss Emily. The family made a pact long ago, and the servants are bound to it. They can't leave, they can't speak freely, and they can't do anything but follow orders. Mrs. Blackwell, she's the one who keeps everyone in line. She's the one who forced you to marry that man." Emily's stomach twisted at the mention of the marriage. She had never wanted to marry him. She barely knew him. But her stepmother had insisted. Eliza's words confirmed the suspicions that had been creeping in her mind. The wedding had not been her choice. "But why didn't you help me before?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eliza's eyes flickered with guilt. "I wasn't sure you'd believe me. I didn't want to get you involved, but I see now you're stronger than I thought. You've uncovered things on your own, and it's only a matter of time before they come for you. But I can help. I know a way to break the curse, to free everyone from their chains." Emily's eyes widened with hope, though it was tempered by fear. "How?" Eliza looked around the room, ensuring no one was listening. "There's an old ritual hidden in the mansion, one that's been passed down through generations. It can undo the pact and set the spirits free, but it requires great risk, and the help of someone who's not bound by the curse. Someone like you." Emily swallowed hard. The thought of risking her life in such a way terrified her, but the alternative, remaining trapped in the mansion, under the control of her stepmother, was too much to bear. "I'll do it," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I want to break this curse for all of us." Eliza smiled softly, relief flooding her face. "We'll need to act quickly. There's no time to waste." As they began to plan their next steps, Emily felt a surge of gratitude for Eliza, her unexpected ally. Despite the darkness that had fallen over her new home, Emily now had hope, and together they would uncover the truth, shatter the curse, and free the mansion from its sinister grip. A shocking revelation. The tension in the mansion had been steadily rising since Emily's conversation with Eliza. As the days passed, she felt more and more trapped within its walls. But it wasn't just the mansion that confined her. It was the marriage her stepmother had forced upon her. The man she was supposed to marry, Thomas, seemed to carry his own darkness, one that she couldn't quite grasp. She had watched him in silence, noticed the way his eyes never quite met hers, how he seemed distant and distracted. It was as though he was hiding something, or perhaps he didn't want to be there at all. He never showed any affection, never seemed to care for her, and yet he remained at the mansion, bound by some unseen force. One evening, as the house fell silent and the servants disappeared to their corners, Emily decided to confront Thomas. She had to know the truth, if only to free herself from the fear that gnawed at her heart. She found him in the library, standing by the window, gazing out at the garden with a somber expression. "Thomas," Emily's voice was steady but laced with curiosity, "there's something you need to tell me. About this marriage. About you." He turned slowly, his face pale under the dim light. For a moment, he said nothing. But then, his lips parted, and he whispered something that chilled her to the bone. "I never wanted this marriage, Emily. I never wanted to be here." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Why are you still here, then?" Thomas stepped closer, his hands trembling slightly. "Because I don't have a choice. You see, I'm not who you think I am. I never was. The truth is, I am not here by my own will. Your stepmother, she's been controlling me for years. The marriage, the promise, it was all part of a deal I never signed up for. I didn't even know you existed until they told me I had to marry you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "What kind of deal? What are you talking about?" He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated, before continuing. "I'm cursed, Emily. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a heartless man. But I am bound to this place, bound to your stepmother's will. She made a pact long ago with my family, a pact that ties us to this mansion, to her, and I can't escape it. If I try to leave, if I try to break the marriage or resist, I'll die. It's a curse, a horrible one." Emily stared at him, her mind racing. "So, you're a victim in all this? You've been forced into this life?" He nodded solemnly. "Yes, your stepmother has controlled me for years. She doesn't just want to marry you off for her own gain. She needs you here because you hold the key to breaking the curse. You are the one she's been waiting for." Emily's mind spun. She had always suspected there was more to the story, but hearing the truth from Thomas himself was a blow she hadn't prepared for. She couldn't believe it. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't the cold, distant man she thought him to be. He was a victim, just like her. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized she was just as trapped as he was. "How do you know all of this?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen the signs," Thomas replied. "The strange behavior of the servants, the whispers that haunt this house, the ritual, all of it points to the fact that I'm bound here, unable to leave until the curse is broken. And your stepmother? She's the one who holds the power." Emily's heart sank. She had been manipulated, forced into a marriage with a man who had no say in the matter. But now she understood. They weren't enemies. They were both pawns in a much darker game. "Is there a way to break it?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. Thomas nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "Yes, but it won't be easy. We have to find the source of her power and destroy it. Only then can we be free." As Emily looked into Thomas's eyes, she saw the man she had never truly known, a man who had been forced into this fate, just like her. The weight of their shared struggle settled between them, and for the first time since her arrival, Emily didn't feel alone. They were allies now, united in their quest to break the curse and uncover the full truth behind the mansion's dark grip on their lives. Escape or confrontation? The weight of Emily's decision pressed on her like an unbearable storm cloud. The truth was out now. Thomas, her so-called husband, was not her captor, but a victim himself, bound by the very same curse that had ensnared her. And her stepmother, the woman who had manipulated her into this marriage, was the one orchestrating it all. The mansion had never felt more oppressive. The walls seemed to close in around her with every passing hour, as if the house itself was alive, watching, waiting for her to make a move. Emily stood in the center of her chamber, racked with indecision. Outside her window, the night was dark and silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. But inside, the air was thick with tension. She could leave. She could pack her things and run, disappear into the night, and seek refuge anywhere but here. But where would she go? The world beyond the mansion seemed foreign, full of danger and uncertainty. Her stepmother's power stretched beyond the mansion's walls. Emily knew that if she ran, there would be no guarantee of safety. And Thomas, he would still be trapped in this cursed existence. But could she stay? Could she truly confront her stepmother and her husband, both of whom had used her for their own purposes? The thought of standing up to them, of facing the monstrous force that had controlled her life, was terrifying. Yet, the spark of defiance growing in her chest was undeniable. She had a right to know the truth. She had a right to free herself from this nightmare. She paced the room, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of her choices, the consequences of each path. On one hand, she could escape and sever ties with everyone, the curse, the mansion, the lies. On the other, she could confront them both, risk everything, and try to shatter the chains that bound them all. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Emily," Eliza's voice whispered through the door, "I know you're struggling, but you can't run. You need to face them, together, with Thomas. The curse won't break unless you stand your ground." Emily opened the door to find Eliza standing there, her face filled with resolve. It was clear that the maid had been waiting for this moment, for Emily to make a decision. "You're right," Emily said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "I've been hiding in fear for too long, but I need Thomas. I can't do this alone." Eliza nodded, her expression sympathetic but firm. "You're not alone anymore. The curse doesn't have to define you. You can fight back. You've already taken the first step." Emily took a deep breath. The decision was made. There would be no running, no more hiding. She would confront her stepmother, confront Thomas, and break the curse once and for all. Together, they would unravel the truth, challenge the dark power that held them captive, and reclaim their freedom. With newfound determination, Emily walked out of her room and down the long, echoing hallway toward the place where her stepmother waited, where the confrontation that would change everything was about to unfold. The climactic resolution. The tension in the mansion reached its peak. Emily walked down the cold, echoing hallways, her heart pounding with each step. Tonight, everything would change. She had made her choice. There would be no more running, no more fear. She was going to confront her stepmother and end the curse once and for all. As she approached the drawing room where her stepmother awaited, her thoughts flashed to Thomas. He had told her the truth about the curse, about the pact that bound them both to this mansion. Emily's heart ached for him. He was just as much a prisoner here as she was. But this night, they would both be free. She could feel it in her bones. When she entered the room, her stepmother, clothed in an elegant black gown, was seated by the fireplace, her face bathed in the flickering light. She looked up, her cold eyes narrowing as she took in Emily's determined expression. "You're here," her stepmother said, her voice smooth but tinged with an unsettling calmness. "I've been waiting for this moment." "I know what you've done," Emily replied, her voice unwavering, "and I'm not afraid of you anymore. You've controlled my life for too long, but that ends tonight." The stepmother's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You think you can break the curse? You think you can defeat me? I made sure you would marry him. You were always meant to be part of the plan." Emily clenched her fists. "I'm not just a pawn in your game anymore. I know about the pact you made, the deal that's bound Thomas and me to this mansion. But no more. The curse dies tonight." Her stepmother stood and moved closer, her eyes flashing with anger. "You don't understand. I did what I had to do to survive. The pact was the only way to secure power. You think you can destroy it? You'll never leave this place. Neither of you will." But Emily was no longer the frightened girl she had once been. Her stepmother's words were nothing more than the desperate attempts of a woman trying to cling to a power she no longer held. Emily's heart raced as she faced the truth. Her stepmother was a master manipulator, but the real power had always been within Emily. "I don't need to fight you," Emily said, her voice calm and strong. "I'm going to expose the truth. Let everyone know who you truly are." As if on cue, Thomas entered the room, his presence a silent support. His eyes met Emily's, and for the first time, there was understanding between them. He was ready too. Together, they could shatter the curse. Emily turned to him, a soft smile touching her lips. "We'll do this together." With Thomas by her side, Emily stood tall and faced her stepmother, her resolve unshaken. She had taken control of her fate. The truth was out, and the curse that had gripped them all for so long was finally breaking apart. The stepmother's facade began to crack. She could no longer maintain the illusion of control. The power she had held for so long was fading, crumbling like dust. As the spell of her manipulation lifted, the once oppressive atmosphere in the mansion began to ease. In the moments that followed, Emily knew that her life would never be the same. The mansion, now free from its dark grip, would no longer be a place of fear. But it wasn't just freedom she had found. It was something more, something that had quietly bloomed in her heart over the past weeks. She had found love, an unexpected bond with Thomas, forged through their shared struggle. It was a love born from truth, respect, and mutual healing. As Emily and Thomas walked away from the mansion together, hand in hand, they knew the future was uncertain, but for the first time in their lives, they were free. The mansion was behind them, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, no longer bound by the past. They had won, and now they could finally start living.